It's now January the 10th, and that's when I get my knock on the door. And it was a loud old knock at 6 o'clock in the morning. Startled, I was like, who is it? It's Navy police. Open the door ajar, and at that point, just 5, 6 men pushed me into the lounge area. There was a heated exchange. What the hell are you doing? I was arrested for misconduct in public office. So these girls were then just, not only were they raped, they were then raped with, and then given the Serbian engraved, were just slashed with the Serbian insignia on their backs. Thankfully, I was able to get so much detail from these young girls. We managed to arrest one of the Serbians.
Welcome to another episode of the Old Paratrooper podcast. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsors, Veterans for Veterans. If you left the military after 1987 and your hearing's taken a knock from your time in the services, click the link in this video. No win, no fee. See if you're eligible.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Webster, and welcome to the Old Paratrooper podcast. A career started as a welder back in mid-80s. I joined the Army in 1989 and I left in 2013 after being deployed in various locations from Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan.
Welcome, Rachel. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
No dramas at all. It's an absolute pleasure when people make time to come on a podcast. So thank you for that. What I like to do with all the podcasts is I like to start at the beginning, get a bit of a background about yourself, where you grew up, where you're from, and ultimately what led you down the road and path that you took in life. So yeah, over to you. Whereabouts you from?
So I'm from a little town called Brigg, which is near Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire. I left school and decided to embark on a career at the steelworks. And I was one of the first female welders post-war to get an apprenticeship at the steelworks as a welder. And the reason I took that path was at school, pretty much, I didn't really want to do home economics, went into the engineering class, did my engineering, finished my year, and we had to do various projects. Queued up with the boys to do some welding, and my school teacher said, sorry, you can't do that, girls don't weld. And that took me on the path of applying for an apprenticeship at the steelworks.
Yeah, that's it. But back in the 80s and again, that's pretty unheard of, isn't it, to go down that route?
Yeah. I mean, it was quite daunting at the beginning. I was one of a cohort of 170 17-year-olds embarking on a career at the steelworks, and we went around various different trades before you went off to decide on the one that you wanted. And I always remember walking into RDL structural workshops after my first year, and it was just like 350 old welders, platers, and then little me turned up. And it was at the same time when that flipping film had been out as well, Flashdance. So you can imagine the banter that I got back then. So yeah, it was a great life experience for then future endeavours into the military, and the banter that I had to endure, dare I say, whilst I was at Steelworks. But it was a great life lesson, and I still look back with fond memories. And also the skills of welding, actually, I did in Iraq and on deployment when we were on exercise in Kenya as well. So my welding skills came in handy on various deployments.
How long did you do welding before you made the leap to join the British Army?
So I'd finished my apprenticeship, and I don't think at that point the management thought that I would actually stick out the 4 years. I think it was a bit of a tick exercise, because it was at that time when women were being promoted into doing different jobs. Margaret Thatcher was waving her handbag in Parliament saying girls can do anything or women can do anything. And I think I was sort of initially a tick exercise to say, look, we've let one go and she hasn't finished, so we don't have to do it anymore. And unfortunately I stayed. And then when I finished, all the guys were going out onto what was called the plant furnaces, where you got a lot of money, And they were like, "No, Rachel, you can't go there. There's no toilets." You know, when you look back and you go, "Oh, I just accepted it," but now obviously that wouldn't be allowed. And so I was sort of kept in the RDL structural workshops. It was some good welding jobs. I did some work on the Channel Tunnel, Queen Elizabeth turbines. But you know, getting the turbines, and then they would take the steps away, so I'd end up being there all day and trying to get out. Let me out. Where's and the foreman would walk around. Where is she? And I'd be like trying to bang out, and you know, bang the turbines to get out. Um, and my cohort, literally, some of them had gone off to join the Royal Engineers, and they came back on leave and were saying how great the army was. And I was like, oh, it sounds really exciting. You know, I'd never left Scunthorpe or that Lincolnshire area. And so I went to the Army Careers Office, finished one of my shifts, 6 to 2 or whatever, and I was all still in my my welding gear. Walked in, there was this big old colour sergeant from the Coldstream Guards sat at his desk. So it looked me up and down, was like, "What can I do for you?" And I was like, "I'd like to join the engineers." And he literally belly laughed, because again, back then, women didn't join the engineers. I don't think they started joining the engineers till 1992. So this is 89. So I said, "Well, that's not very fair." And he went, "Well, that's the way it is." And he showed me a video of R&P and the Ink Corps, and I went, "Oh." He says, "Yeah, the R&P's really good. Yeah, you really like that." Little did I know that we were the most hated regiment in the British Army. And yeah, and that was my journey into the military police.
How did you because I always liked, I've had a few females on, but the kind of the running thing that I get, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because again, the females that I've had on have had outstanding careers. And if they was male, their stories would get a lot more traction than
Mm.
what they do get. You know, again, I spoke to Gina, that we both know. She's had and you know, an incredible career. And if she was male, her story would be like massively popular, as would yours. So how does that make you feel when is it a difficult one to swallow that because you are female, or is it just part and parcel, do you think?
No, I think our stories are slightly different. I think the public or your sort of maybe community that watch your podcast, it's more obviously aligned to the sort of deployment side of things, the stories, isn't it? The bombs, the bullets, the you know, the sort of nitty-gritty stuff that really, you know, women, although we are on the front line, don't get to that level of sort of conflict, dare I say. But we have other interesting backstories that and experiences that we can share, but it's maybe a different niche, a different audience that maybe we attract probably.
Yeah, I think that's you might be right there. It's just it seems a bit of a shame that your story, because again, I've interviewed some fascinating ladies from across the board, and their stories are incredible, and they don't seem to get a lot of views, or they don't get the traction. It feels like it's harder to push, and it really does annoy me that this day and age that they don't get the kind of recognition that they deserve. I talk about this a lot. My partner's a
Mm,
firefighter. And even now in sort of 2026, she finds it a little bit difficult. It's hard enough for females to still integrate into them male dominated environments.
yeah.
And it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because again, it is 2026. It's like, and no one cares. I think the reality is, as long as you're capable of doing the job, that's the main thing. And I still think we kind of focus on the fact that you might be male, you might be female, you might identify as this, when really no one gives a shit. They just want you to be good at what you do. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Well, let's hope that this gets the traction, eh? Let's hope that
Well, I hope
we
so.
turn it
Yeah.
around and get loads of views on this. Um, yeah, I suppose, yeah, like Gina, pretty unique in how I started my career at the steelworks, which which I see has helped forge me into where I ended up, that resilience and the things that we all talk about, that strength, inner strength, going against the norm. Don't tell me I can't, because I can has always been a bit of a mantra of mine. And similar when I've chatted to Gina, she's of the similar mindset. So yeah. And I think also we were that generation when we joined, particularly where we had to show how good we were. I remember doing hard targeting around Coal Island with paras, and they gave me the white sifter to freaking carry. And I didn't mind, because at the end, one of the sergeants tapped me on the back and went, "You're all right for a bird." And I took that as a massive compliment. That, to me, it still stays with me, because to get to get the endorsement from the paras, from, infantry lads or whatever, when I was out doing various deployments, that was my badge of honor, because I wanted to be up there as good as, and trained, and be, and be as fit, or as fit as I possibly could, to keep up with them, and not to be seen as somebody that was, caused the patrol to slow down or whatever else it was. I wanted to make sure that I was an asset. And I think that's probably, the house. I always remember someone saying, "You're only as good as the last woman that the men worked with," so that, you would have preconceived ideas about us if you knew that a female was coming or joining a patrol, or, when I ended up being with the Green Howards in Oberlich, that was difficult because, they'd been there waiting for 3 months, working. We were all in like Macedonia for 3 months, and I turn up in Oberlich with just about 48 hours after we'd been over the border, and they get me. But luckily, the way I had my career had gone, and I was able to integrate really well with them, and we worked extremely hard together. But yeah, I think that's what it's about, being able to hold your own, and not have, that I'm a woman, I could, attitude. I think you had to be one of the boys back then, not so much now, but you had to try and be as fit and as capable. Similar to
Yeah,
your partner, probably with the fire service,
yeah.
She
I think
probably
that's
we all probably try and overachieve to be as good as.
Yeah, to fit in, but like I say, I think the annoying bit is as well as like there's good and bad with both, obviously male and female. But no one, if there's a bloke that comes through and he's shit, no one goes, well, all the blokes are going to be shit.
No,
But if
yeah.
the female comes through that's not very good, because that happens, not everyone's really good. You get shit everywhere, but then suddenly it's like, well, she's shit because she's a female, and that's, I think, not the right attitude. And again, I still think it happens now. I like to think we're moving in the right direction, but there is still that kind of wall up. And again, I think by talking about it, it's a good way of kind of diminishing that thing. But again, they have these mad kind of things that it kind of sets you back again with all the hard work that females have done in these careers by having female only kind of recruitment days and stuff with certain
Yeah.
organizations. And then you're a bit like, well, you're creating divide again. Just have a joint kind of recruitment day, and whoever fits the mold and whoever makes the standard. So again, it's weird how they still keep dividing but not meaning to, and try and being inclusive. It kills me off. I talk about it a lot. Anyway, so moving on. So you decided to join the army, 1989. You've gone into the military police. How did you find it? Day one, week one, basic training,
Well, basic training for me was Guildford. So we
right?
had to, because we were still cap badges WREC, Provo, attached to the Royal Military Police until the WREC was disbanded in gosh, when was that? Must have been 2002, 2003. I should know that, shouldn't I? But anyway, yeah, so we were classed, so we didn't have the cap badge given to us until, the not 2003. Gosh, where am I going? 90s, wasn't it? I
It's
joined
gonna
in
be it's
89.
gonna
Yeah,
be
so it was about,
90s, early
yeah,
90s.
midnight, yeah. And so that was a unique experience because it was an all-female uh, training establishment. And it was at that point when you were not allowed to be gay in the army. So there was lots of females there that were hiding their sexuality, because if they had shown that they were, lesbian, whatever, they would be discharged. So for the girls that were going towards the military police, I wouldn't say that we were picked on. Dare I say, we were maybe identified, and it was an uncomfortable sort of environment at times. Because ultimately, you know, when I went out into the big wide world, one of my first investigations was exactly that at JHQ in Rydalen. A girl had come in and complained about someone propositioning her from the female cohort in her block, and we had to investigate it. And you know, thankfully, those archaic type draconian rules then changed.
Yeah, I do
But
find
yeah,
them rules again, because it's still obviously within living memory. It's not that long ago
no,
that you could be discharged from the military because of your sexuality, and I find that again, and we do. I think it's a weird one, and you have to be careful how you say it, because as much as it is a normal part of life now, well, it is for me. I don't look at someone and judge them on their color, on their sexuality. I look on them, and I say this, I don't mean to swear, but I basically, if they're an arsehole, I'm probably not going to like them. That's how I base my kind of
same
understanding of
here.
people. It is, isn't it? And I think that's a
Yeah,
good way to do it. You look at them and go, you know what? If you're not a very nice person, you're a bit of an arse, probably not going to like you. But I don't judge someone on their color or their sexuality. I look at how good they are as a team player,
as a
how good they
human.
are as a
Yeah,
human, as a
yeah,
human, and have they got the skills and attributes to benefit the organisation they're joining. Um, and it's dead simple for me, and it seems like it's dead simple for you, but we still get it wrong in
yeah.
2026, which is a shame. Um, but yeah, so how long was basic training for you back then? 12 weeks?
Yeah, I think it was 8 to 12 weeks, if I remember. And then from Guildford, there was about 5 of us. We all then turned up at Ruslan Barracks in Chichester. And that was like, whoa, because we would then join in the squad who had obviously already formed relationships, the guys, um, after they'd finished their phase 1 training. So we then joined them then for the phase 2 training, and we were sort of integrated. So, you know, the hogs have arrived, you know, all that sort of stuff, and all the other things that you're not allowed to say these days. Um, and yeah, I remember walking through Ruslan Barracks, and I would literally looked at this, you know, guys in these blues, and he had the peak cap, and I was like, ah. And then this guy just looked at me. What do you think you're looking at? Don't look at me. And I was, oh God, I was petrified. But again, it was, you know, it was just, you had to get through it. You know, it was a long, gosh, how long was that? It was like 4 or 5 months phase 2 training for us,
Yeah.
because we then came out as lance corporals. We had to be lance corporals because we had to have some form of rank when dealing with, you know, soldiers in the big wide world. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was an interesting time. But the military police had women, you know, incorporated into their sort of environment for you know, decades. So it wasn't a new thing. I think what in the 2002, 2003, when women started joining the Royal Engineers, the Royal Artillery, and all the other arms was opening up, that's when, you know, guys would be ringing up the military police saying, we've got these females arriving, but we don't know how to deal with them. Can you come down, Rach, and just give us a bit of a brief? I'm like, you just treat them like anybody else. But it was just so strange to see it, you know, and now it's, you know, you've female RSMs everywhere, and you know, it's great to see. And I'm quite envious. I wish I had joined now, you know. But you know, the likes of me and Gina helped, I suppose, change how things were, you know, for our time, really,
Yeah,
for the new recruits.
your generation would have been the you know, the start, and it's a generational thing. And I think even as a man now, I look at the from a different perspective. I look at the kit and equipment that the soldiers have
Yeah,
now in the paras, and some of the stuff that a one para doing that excuse me, that are supporting special forces, and I'm like, oh, why can't I have been in now, or been young enough to be in now and be involved
yeah,
in that? So there is always that kind of look. But yeah, I get you. But I think your generation shaped the way for females to go into the military, and you know, the way it is now. So without you guys, you know, we'd have probably never moved to the position where we're at now, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
So you've done basic, you've done your phase 2 training. Where was your first posting then? When did you come out?
JHQ in Rheindarlen. So it was still at that time of like the Cold War, active edge and all that. and yeah, it was a great location. Most of the female cohort from the WRC were based in Rydalen, so it was very busy at weekends. So you'd get the guys from coming in from Fallinbostel, Hona, drink, women, chaos. But it was a good sort of introduction to the military, and it was at that time when also, it wasn't you could two guys fighting, you could go in, split them up. Come on, guys, take them back to the guard room. Everything would be done. You wouldn't have to do the laborious paperwork and arrest them. And then obviously things changed, and then you had to deal with all the paperwork side of stuff. Um, so yeah, I did that for a year. Then I was identified to go on to like the drugs team, which was a great experience as a young lance corporal, working on a drugs team, going out to nightclubs back in the rave days in Germany, identifying, trying to find drug dealers and stuff like that. And getting soldiers for taking drugs, because obviously at that point it was and still is prevalent and needed to be sort of stopped. So yeah, that was an interesting year.
Yeah, I should imagine you kind of, because we heard the rumours that some units were worse than others for drugs problems,
Yeah,
and I think during the sort of 90s, from my understanding, I don't think there was a big problem with it. When CDTs came around, there wasn't masses amount from Power Rage that ever got caught. But I do apologise. I'm full of cold as well, Rachel. I do apologise.
you're all
Um,
right.
but there's this kind of, there was some other units that it was kind of rife in, which you'll know yourself. You would
Yeah, yeah,
have
yeah.
identified certain units. At what stage do you decide to transfer to the kind of adjutants corps then? When was that? Was that
So
quite
yeah, so
quite
well,
early on?
RMP was in the adjutants corps, part of those branches. So
Yeah.
I finished Germany, move on now 13 years, had a deployment Bosnia, Kosovo, and in 2003 deployed to Iraq with the military police. And I think I had some challenging times out there. Uh, I was disappointed with chain of command, as we all are at some point in our careers as a soldier. And I still very much enjoyed my military career, and just had fallen out of love with the military police, if I'm honest, and wanted to see what else I could do. So I remember walking into the chief clerk's office after coming back from Iraq and saying, right, I want to transfer. What can I transfer to? And he said, come to us. And I remember laughing at that point. But you know what? I'm so proud that I did transfer, because to do some of the things that I did as an officer, later on in the SBS, really, really, really chuffed with, especially after the deployment with the rifles to Afghanistan. I left the military not long after that, so I still sort of consider myself a bit of a rifleman at heart. So yeah, I transferred to the SBS in the 2003. Went straight away, which was great, really, because I always wanted to join the Royal Engineers. After I transferred and done the training, I ended up with 22 Engineer Regiment in Tidworth, and I got on really well there. I had a great sergeant major, and the CO identified me for a commission. So the actual the CO and his command team were like, go for your late entry commission. And they really invested in me, in terms of, doing all the command tasks, the sort of essay writing, because I'd not been that academic at school. And I don't think anybody thought I would be successful. And I did quite very well on my 3-day event, and got a commission into the SBS then. So I was only really serving as a senior for about a year.
What would you say out of the tours that you did um, was the most? Because what I try and do, Rachel, is by people talking about sort of certain conflicts. Obviously, when times go quite quiet, you know, Afghanistan has finished now. Obviously, what's in the news at the minute, it looks like Iran's kicking off, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's been a period of calm for the British military. And then we forget about the tours that guys, you know, Afghanistan, that the guys and girls have been on in Iraq and stuff, and it gets kind of forgotten. So what I try and do is talk to people and forget the forgotten wars, if you like, the Bosnias, the Sierra Leones, Afghan now. It's in kind of, it's a long
Mm.
distant memory. For you, what would you say was the probably the most difficult period or difficult tour that you were involved in during your time in the military?
I think, Kosovo, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's when I first realized the depths of evilness. I just, you know, it was before obviously all the social media and news and things like that, and we're sat in Macedonia, you're hearing bits, but you know that things is going on, but you're not actually in it. You're not seeing what's happening. Even though I'd had Bosnia, I didn't deploy to Bosnia until the 1996. So that had been an established deployment for a few years. I hadn't really gone right at the start of that. But people who I know have said it was very similar. Kosovo to me, I went over as we talked about, I went over the border initially in Pristina. I remember going to the first incident, I think it was actually the Paras that had shot someone. And I remember, I think we'd only been there about 12 hours. And that was the first incident that I went to. And then I was then sent off to Obelich as the sort of police point of contact. And I was with the Green Howards. Obelich was a very fractured town. It had a community of both Serbian and Albanian. And as we all knew at that point with General Jackson, when they signed that agreement, it was to make sure that we then didn't get rid of the rest of the Serbians. They were good people. And the things that I dealt with there from, I remember the first few hours I had my, police station open. We had hundreds of people queuing up to register missing persons, deaths, rapes, house fires. It was just endless. And I remember the old DOB, the Daily Occurrence book. I literally wrote every single occurrence in that. And it took me days to get everything gathered. And then I would then go out on the patrols with the Green Howards, not for anything other than to support them especially as a female out there, dealing with some of the atrocities that we saw. Girls, poor girls that had been killed, women that we saw who had their bellies cut. It was horrible. It was a horrible time. But you know what? I hold my head up high because as a team, closed down an illegal police station. The Albanians were doing horrendous things to each other. I got on very well with the KLA commander. The KLA commander approached me and said he knew of several girls that had been raped, and he knew who one of the people was that was still living in the village. And I had to explain to them about evidence taking. I remember taking 3 female interpreters with me to get these statements because it was traumatic for them as well, because they'd lived that experience with what was going on whilst we were waiting in Macedonia. And the details were so graphic. Some of these girls, the last things that they had seen, their grandfathers were lined up with them, because obviously all the fighting men had gone up to the hills. So the only men that were left in the village, on this small little village, was outside Obelich, was their grandfathers. So the Serbians had come in, lined up their grandfathers. Their grandfathers then were then forced to watch their granddaughters been raped, and then they were then shot. The grandfathers were then shot. So these girls were then just, not only were they raped, they were then raped and then given the Serbian engraved, and say engraved, were just slashed with the Serbian insignia on their backs. And, I still get emotional even just talking about that now. But thankfully, I was able to get so much detail from these young girls. from the smell of the breath to the teeth to the description, we managed to arrest one of the Serbians that was still actively, in Obelich, running a cafe. And the police, the Hague Tribunal came and took all the evidence. Well, representatives from the Hague Tribunal came and took all the evidence that I'd gathered on that. And then, there was an article done about, me, Corporal Windsor Trust to rape Muslims. It's probably one of the proudest things I've done in my entire career. And I couldn't have done that without being there with the Green Howards. And some of the young lads there at that time, they were finding mass graves. You get people coming into the police station saying, there's a mass grave. And we were like, how do you know? Oh, we can smell it. And when we were first there, we was like, how can they just smell it? And actually, after a few weeks of being there, you could get that smell. And still things to this day can put me back there with that smell. One of the funniest things though from that deployment was we'd worked really hard with the community, and we'd got them this tractor and trailer, and so that they could go around the village and collect up all the rubbish, because you can imagine at that point, when you're in that sort of stabilization phase, there isn't the nothing is yet in place, but we were trying to move forward. And they were dead proud of this tractor, and they would take it all over the train station. We had like a railway line that ran through Obelich, and they would take it and burn it all. And, the village was sort of thriving a little bit. And remember, I was on patrol one of the Green Howards, and I used to get called sheriff. It's just like, sheriff, someone's stealing the tractor. So me and this Green Howard, we gave chase this Green Howard, like the tractor, and was like, there's no way we're going to get this flipping tractor back. Anyway, this little Trabant come zooming by us, and we're like, stop, everybody out, apart from the driver. And there must have been about 10 people get out of this little Trabant. And then we were, I remember seeing, follow that tractor, and I'm now crying. The guy in the back's crying laughter. And then this driver took it really seriously, and we ended up doing a U-turn, getting in front of the tractor, stop the tractor. We end up arresting the guys. They go back they get in the back of the trailer. And I'm looking at him, and he's like, how are we going to get the tractor back? I went, I'm from Lincolnshire. I can drive a tractor. So I got in the tractor and drove it back through the village, and everyone was clapping us. So yeah, it has really, it has emotions of polar opposites when I think of Kosovo. And I came back, as we all do, different for, I suppose, the Paris, but as a core, you're due. The Manning records don't then look and go, oh, she's just come back from Kosovo, she needs to stay where she is for a little bit, decompress. No, they posted me to Northern Ireland. I was like, great. But luckily, you've got colleagues that you'd met throughout your career, and there was people there you could talk to. But I think that's the first time I ever understood something might not be right, if you know what I mean. Like, mental health was still that taboo. If you went to see a psychiatrist, for example, in the army back then, you would have been discharged. So, I had silent calls with the Samaritans in the late hours, because I'd invested so much of my life with that community, from a little lady that I'd managed to put into an apartment, knowing that a Serbian policeman wasn't going to come back, who had her house burnt, who used to give us bread every day, to the family that I'd helped and support after the girls had been raped. So, part of my soul was left with Obelich, and I would love to go back there and visit it now. It's one of my things that is on my list to do. And it was difficult to explain to people that depth, because, I say that there was other areas. Majority of the military police were based in Pristina, and there wasn't many others doing what I was doing up in Obelich. So it was hard to explain some of the things that I'd been doing.
Yeah, because again, it's not conventional war fighting like you'd explain it, that people assume or wrongly associate PTSD with being in sort of shootouts or contacts and stuff. And again, this is why we try and talk about these conflicts, because I am hearing that. I never served it in Bosnia or Kosovo. I did Macedonia, but you know, you hear these stories of the mass graves and the atrocities that you saw, and you're dealing with them. You're listening to these accounts. You're seeing the worst of human nature that is possible, that people can do that to other humans, and then having to almost counsel, but also deal with that yourself. And it's a difficult thing. And it's something that's gonna stick with you, and like you said, it has stuck with you, and that was the first kind of real sort of time when you realized, hold on a minute. Would you say that that's the time then when you thought, you know, did you know that that was going to stick with you? I know that's a weird question, but did you feel that that was going to have effects further down the line?
Not at that time when I was in Northern Ireland. I did feel that I had all these emotions that I just, because we weren't talking about it, were we?
Yeah.
Um, I just couldn't pinpoint what it was, but something wasn't right. I just felt guilty. I was crying all the time, and I felt when everybody asked me. I mean, I know that's the first time I've really actually got a bit teary talking about it today, because I try and look at the funny things that happen, like the tractor
Yeah.
scenario and stuff.
Yeah.
And I often do think of those young girls. Did they make it? Were they okay? Because I remember, looking into their eyes when we was taking the statements, and they were soulless, and you think, oh, how did they ever get over it? And thankfully back then there was, sorry, I'm sidetracking slightly. There were aide fontaine who, um, medical aid, who came and gave them some counselling and some support. So I'm hoping that they did. That's why I'd like to go back and recover it. But no, going to your question now, I didn't really think about it. I think I put it. I think like what we all do, we have that black box and we seal it up, and hopefully that it never comes out. And as we talk about, I guess what happened later on in my life, it did come out eventually, and actually when I went and had professional counselling, I managed to talk about all this stuff.
I think what I try and do, or what I've kind of what I've noticed, and it's what you've just said there is bang on, and it's about how you said you'd like to go back, and I don't know if this is the right term. I'm no expert in mental health or anything like that, but it's almost like closing the
Yeah.
the loop, and
Mhm.
it's funny because you'd like to know what came of, you know, what happened to them girls, you know, how did they go on, move forward? And for you, that's almost like sort of closing the loop and getting some sort of reassurance about what you did. And I say this a lot, with different stuff, whether that's fire service, whether it's military. It's about getting different perspectives and literally that, just closing the circle, so
Yeah.
you can almost uh, put it to bed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And I think that's what we all want, and now I'm a massive advocate of counselling, and I even gone down and, explored reflexology and things like that. And, and that's been super helpful, which I never thought it would be. I was like, no, believe, how can that have an effect? Somebody messing around my toes. But actually it's amazing. And I feel so much better for using it. And I think it's great now, this generation, whatever, that talk openly about, their mental health, and you know, just been open with each other. And these podcasts, I think, are amazing because it does give you an opportunity and a platform to talk about it and help others. Because even if somebody is listening, and they feel, where do they go or how can they get help? It is good to talk.
Moving on from that kind of stuff, obviously Iraq and Afghanistan. How did you find them tours?
Yeah, good. Well, I mean, Iraq was pretty tough. Um, I was still military police on my first tour of Iraq in the 2003. Um, it was, it was different as well. And we, I, t- I, when I look back on all the deployments that I've done, and you think how good though, even though Kosovo was very difficult, how great that deployment was. In terms of the stabilization phase, going from war phase to stabilization phase to, to just just the logistics, the support, everything. And then you think, well, it's because General Jackson was in charge. And then you look at and then you deploy to Iraq. And I thought, oh, it will be very similar. You know, we'll go over the border from Kuwait. We'll all get embedded into various locations around, our area of responsibility from Basra to wherever, and we'll crack on with the relevant units. And that was my mindset, and obviously that didn't happen. And we went straight from that war phase to stabilization phase without the stabilization phase being ready. And that left a big vacuum of uncertainty with the Iraqis and for us deployed on the ground. Because one minute you're arresting somebody and being able to process them and send them down to Qusar, the next minute, well, what do we do with them? Because they haven't committed what we would class as, a war crime or anything. They've just caught them stealing, or you've caught them, doing something that needed intervention. And lots of things were not properly dealt with at that point, and that caused a lot of issues for us on the ground.
Yeah, I think that was the bonkers bit about the Iraq conflict, because it did go from that initial war fighting to then a bit like middle ground, where it was just a bit like it wasn't
Murky.
stable,
Yeah.
wasn't really a war, but there was insurgents kicking off, and then there was the fight between who was taking power. There was a power struggle, and it was a bit Wild West at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that in itself caused everyone issues. Us, the police. We were trying at that point to recruit local policemen, train them up, because like it's very similar to when we went in the border in Kosovo. Everything was mapped out. We knew where there's going to be the police stations were going to be. We knew where the magistrate, they had a temporary council, all that. But I think, because what was different, the social media, the Sky News, the news feeds, everybody was getting to see what was happening there. And therefore you then had all the protest marches. I mean, I remember sitting in Basra watching the news, and, there was all these people protesting at the house, at Parliamentary Square, stop the war, stop the war. And, I think the government just bowed down too early and stopped the war too early. We should have had several more months for the planners and the generals and all the other stuff to do their stuff in order for it then to roll out to a successful deployment. And I think the IATs of this world would not have been needed if we'd have had that time, and people wouldn't have been put in positions where it was murky, and therefore then people were then being investigated, soldiers are being investigated for doing wrongdoing, when actually, whose fault was that?
Yeah, it was, like I say, because of the difficult transition. When you're in a war fighting mode, if you like, you've got rules of engagement, you've got this, you've got set out kind of defined tasks, you've got orders. But when it quickly moves into that transitional phase too soon, where you're still being attacked, but you're not technically war fighting, as it were, it was. I remember it being. I was there on the CP circuit then. That's when I know I can relate to what you're saying, because it was just a crazy time between 2003 and probably 2006. There'll be people that are watching this that'll correct me on the timeline, but it was just lawless, no sort of infrastructure, no real anyone taking charge, and it was just chaos, wasn't it?
Yeah, it lacked a General Jackson. That's what it lacked.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing one of the orders, like somebody said, "Oh, I don't know, go sort the breadbasket out." Well, what do you mean by go sort the breadbasket out? And for those who were there, breadbasket was where most of the resources was getting put, and every evening it would get basically 50 odd Iraqis would come in and try and steal and take everything from there. And it just caused carnage and all sorts of stuff going on, which, I don't get into the detail of. But yeah, and I think particularly when we crossed over the border into Kuwait, my section, we were sent to Azabaya. So we did that ring of steel around Azabaya for 10 days, because the think as soon as we'd gone over the border, the engineers went missing. Two engineers went missing. So they tried to do that ring of steel around there, because what they didn't want to do is have them been used in or get any further up, away or up to Baghdad or wherever they were planning on taking them. And unfortunately, they were killed. And that was my first 10 days out there, uh, and I realised the lack of support that I'd got from, dare I say, the military police at that point. And if I'd not had the support from the engineers that I was co-located with, we'd have had a lot more difficult time. And I think our actions on, because we were in the soft skin Land Rovers at the time, was we just jumped in the freaking the cesspit, basically, because all sorts was happening each night. And once that VCP was collapsed, I then went up to Shaber Log Base, as it was then. That's where all the sort of before it became that logistic place, but that's where all the sort of battle groups were reforming before we decided on what was going to happen next. And I remember having this very heated discussion with my officer commanding at that point, and that was my decision then. I was like, I'm done. I'm done with the military police when I get back. But great thing was, I ended up working in the head office in Basra, and there was a little girls' school that was just down the road, and managed to get quick impact project money to help refurbish that school. And that's when I did some welding, because I remember employing these local Iraqis to help, get the school back. You just needed tidying up, paint and stuff like that. And they were all sat down, and I was saying to my interpreter, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, they're waiting for the welder who's not turned up." I went, "Where's the where's the welding rig?" So I put my stuff on, and I wish to God I managed to get a photo, but obviously didn't. And these Iraqis like, and I welded up the gates, and I was all right. Okay, that's that bit done. What's next? Get back to work. And it was great. I mean, the Prime Minister, as it was then, Tony Blair, then came to that school, actually, when he came to visit the troops. It was funny because I saw myself on I listened to that Blair documentary the other day, and actually I'm on episode 2 right at the very end. There's me stood next to him. And then not long after that, I went back to Germany, and that's when I decided to transfer and moved on.
Yeah, so obviously an outstanding sort of 13 odd years with the military police. You've done some really interesting conflicts, some interesting stuff, and like I say, some good memories, a lot of good memories, I suspect. But obviously some that have stuck with you that are not so good. That's part and parcel. But we do remember the good times as well, because
yeah.
they're the laughs, and we talk about it a lot. And some of the best times I ever had in the forces were the laughs and the nights out, and even like being in the conflicts and some funny shit happening and stuff. And you do. And I think that carries the dark times and helps you with the dark times, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, and I don't know whether we might listen to this, but if he did, it'd be great to reconnect with him. I remember, because before I transferred to the military, from the military police, I was identified to be an instructor at Sandhurst, or go through the process. So with that, you went on all those churn of the courses and everything. And I found myself in Brecon for a couple of those courses. One, obviously, for your skill at arms. And then I went back. Not many women at that point had done it in the 2002, 2003. Was the LFTT, the Live Firing Tactical Training, phase 2 of your senior Brecon.
Yeah.
And I remember being so scared, though, because I was a sergeant's mess, Brecon, RMP, Bird. Oh my God, it's going to be hell. And and actually, the first couple of days, no one really spoke to me. And then I realised, you got to know people from all the courses, bit of banter and stuff. And I remember first day, there was this huge para came into. It was part of our syndicate. And he had like these tattoos on his neck and his hands. I was like, oh my God, he's going to hate me. Oh my God, what a lovely man. Dion. And I ended up being his like sidekick. And I knew everything about GPMG SF role. So, me and him, he used to get me set up, do it all. We were both students on the course, but all on all the testing, I would be setting up GPM GSF because I'd never be able to do it again back in the real world. So yeah, I became a bit of a ninja only because of Dion obviously showing me. But yeah, that was great memories, and obviously drinks in the mess as well. And I remember the final exercise. I'm sure the instructors just did it for devilment, but I remember like posting about flipping 15, 20 odd grenades on the final exercise. And then again, very similar to the old Coal Island memory, getting tapped on the back in the silence mess. Oh, you did all right. You did, Webster. You were all right. I was like, thanks very much. And I had bruises and freaking. I was battered when I'd finished that exercise, but fond memories. Yeah.
Was Dion his nickname Didar by any
I can't
chance?
remember, but
Big, tall, dark-haired lad.
he didn't have. I don't think he had tall. I remember he was. His wife was expecting twins. I remember that, and so yeah, he was just a fab. I mean, I haven't got my course photographs anymore. It was the days before.
I'm
But
trying
actually,
to.
that LFTT course, we were out on. I think it was one of the final exercises, one X range. We was out on the ranges, and we all got pulled together, and it was 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we were all sat there, and then I remember we all went back to the armory, and we were all cleaning our weapons, watching the aftermath on the TV.
Yeah, I think everyone remembers where they were at when
Yeah,
that happened. I think I was in Macedonia when that happened,
yeah.
and we knew that was going to reshape the kind of landscape for the military for the foreseeable future, and it still continues to kind of shape the way that we do things now, and the conflicts in the Middle East and stuff. Whether you believe what you believe with it or it's true or not true, it's shaped the military that we know and we kind of recognise today, doesn't it? So obviously I'm conscious of the time, Rachel,
Oh,
but
yeah.
obviously moving on from the kind of the military, you obviously you transferred and you went on and had a great career in that aspect and stuff. At what stage was it time up after
Yeah.
24 years? Was that or was you ready to go at that point, you think, to
Yeah.
start embark on a different career?
Yeah, I mean, I'd got a short service commission, so pretty much I just did an extra 2, instead of 22, I did 24. So I was early 40s, 43. I was at the Rifles, left from there, did my resettlement from there. And I remember going to, uh Barclays, on like one of the work on the sort of an insight day. And I'd been to Canary Wharf previously with the riflemen. We'd done a fundraiser there, and I was like, wow, what a place. So in my mind, I got my resettlement was like, yep, I've ring fenced where I want to live, London, and I want to work around Canary Wharf. And that was my battle plan. And then I saw that Barclays had done this insight, was doing this military insight day, and I was just overwhelmed. That was the first time, obviously, I met Stuart Tootle, and he ended up being my boss, and he's still a mentor and in my life now, and I'm very grateful of that. So I went to the insight day. It was all about what he was. The sort of the idea of what the military program was about, the after program, which I think has been rebranded now, but the main heart of it was to support injured soldiers who were coming out of Headley Court, but still were still in that void. They were still having to still have some rehabilitation, so they hadn't finished yet. So they were still in service, to get them in to do work placements. And I just thought, wow, what a great concept. And got just chatting in general to a few people. Ended up speaking to a HR lady. She liked my CV. She liked the backstory of me being an REO, which was admin, support, things like that. And I got a call from her a few weeks later and said, "Look, we've secured some funding to expand the after program. We need somebody to go into the business and promote why the MDs in Barclays should have soldiers coming in to do work placements." Great opportunity for me. And also, go to the sort of career transitional partnership events to say to guys, come on into Barclays. Well, I can't be a banker. And I'm like trying to explain to them, no, it's a big corporate bank. If you're a signaller, there's communications, military police, Incorps, investigations, soldiers, bankers, blah, blah, blah. There's a job for anyone, project management, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it was great opportunity. And I relished that role because it was helping me with my own transition as well. So yeah, that was the start of then the chapter that I never anticipated would happen in my life.
Yeah, so talk us through that. You're obviously kind of embedded now in Civvy Street. You're enjoying doing what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, your whole kind of world sort of dropped from beneath you, so to speak, didn't it?
Yeah, it was in the October of 2013, so I'd only literally been out, 6 months. And I got a call on my work mobile, basically saying, "Are you Rich Webster?" I was like, "Yes, my name is. I'm working for IAT for Iraqi historic allegations or accusations, as I like to call them, team. And we would like to talk to you." And I was like, "Yeah, happy days. What do you want to talk about?" "Oh, we want to talk to you about X." And I was like, "I've got nothing to say. I wasn't in the same location as that person. I've got nothing of an evidential nature to give. So, no, thank you very much. I'll decline your offer to give a statement." And at that point, he's like, "Well, I can force you." I was like, "Well, if you force me, fine, but we'll go through a solicitor." And I give him my email. I said, "Follow it up on an email and I'll get back to you." So we've got an audit trail. Happy. So a couple of days later, got an email from him, said, "Still stand firm on my initial conversation with you. Do not wish to speak to you about X. I have nothing of an evidential nature to give." And obviously, I'd been following the IAT investigations. It was quite well publicised on the news. This Phil Shiner was like
Mm.
leading the way, giving it, soldiers who have been bad and humiliating Iraqis are not, treating them humanely back in 2003, no food, no water, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, the hell, there must have been a different location to me because I didn't see any of that. But fast forward, it's now January the 10th, 6 o'clock in the morning. Um, and by the way, no, just rewind slightly. It upset me slightly. It unsettled me as well because it brought back unpleasant sort of memories at that point.
As it would,
Um,
yeah.
as it would. It was just unsettling. And then I started thinking, well, you know what? If I'm feeling like this, what about the other guys out there that were deployed at the same time? Surely they must be experiencing similar conversations. And I was in the lucky position that I was working with the MOD, some senior generals at that point, about changing and supporting how the resettlement process should look, and improving it. And I remember speaking to this one general. I had a meeting booked with him, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I went, "Why you say that?" I said, "Oh, you just seem a bit different." I was like, I was quite short and blunt, and I said, "Yeah, I am. I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit disappointed, to be fair." And relayed the conversation. He said, "Oh, they shouldn't have done that. That's not right. You should have had a letter or whatever. Shouldn't be just ringing you out of the blue." Now, for those of you who are listening, who don't know anything about the IAP piece, it was initially with the military police. The military police got removed from it and the Navy police came in because they were saying that the RMP were too close to the soldiers at that point and they weren't going to be investigating it with, with a due diligence. And what a load of nonsense that was. So the Navy police came in. So the Navy police have no idea about how the army operate, whatever. And also the other half was ex-CID type policemen or ex-coppers, and they were getting employed by Red Snapper and on like an enormous amount of money a day. And they were the key investigators. So all these reports, what Phil Shiner, we now know the disgraced lawyer, was collecting, was landing on these desks, and then they were coming for people who had been accused of XYZ. And that's how my name got involved in someone's case, because by association. And that's how it come to fact. So I was unsettled, blah, 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 blah. It's now January the 10th, and that's when I get my knock on the door. And it was a loud old knock at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was getting ready to get up anyway. I was going to go for a run, and I was like, "Oh, shall I? It's cold outside." Big knock. Startled, I was like, "Who is it?" It's Navy police. Now, my last unit was the Rifles 3 Commando Brigade, so I'm thinking, "Oh my God, somebody's had me down as a next of kin." So I grabbed my dressing gown, ran down the stairs, opened the door ajar, and at that point, just 5, 6 men pushed me into the lounge area. there was a heated exchange. What the hell are you doing? You know, I was then arrested. I'm sure you've heard this phrase over the past couple of days or weeks. You know, I was arrested for misconduct in public office. You know, I've heard that constantly on the news this past couple of weeks. You know, with Mandelson and everybody else, and you know, Prince Andrew, whatever he's called now. And you think, oh yeah, that's again reminding me back. Silly, isn't it? Hear that term on the news,
Yeah.
but that reminds me back of my arrest. And I was like, where's your, you know, been ex-RMP, you know, where's your warrant? Where's your arrest warrant? Where you have got no right over me. You know, I want a Met policeman here. I'm a civilian. Doesn't matter. We're taking you. And this guy he's the civilian who I liken to Burnside, you know, the dodgy copper in the bill.
Yeah.
Um, I'm like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And at that point, I made a run for it and literally tried to get up the stairs. And this Navy guy grabbed hold of me in my dressing gown. Anyway, I sort of tussled away, got upstairs, and he pushed me down onto the bed, put my hands, you know, put me in handcuffs. And I'm pleading to let go. And I'm like, if you behave, and this is, you know, when I look back, it makes me so angry. Not angry is the wrong word. You know, if you behave yourself, we'll release you. I'm like, who do you think you're talking to?
Unreal.
And it was like shocker capture, you know, crying, all the emotions you can imagine. I was on my own, you know, um, and um, and I sort of said, yeah, you know, just let go of me, please. I'll cooperate. Right, get dressed. So I had to. These guys left the bedroom, and these two young Navy girls in their 18, 19 or whatever came in the room and watched me get dressed. I hadn't been to the toilet, hadn't brushed my teeth, hadn't had any water, frogged march out my house and I said, where are you taking me? And they're like, well, you'll find out when you get there. It was all this cloak and dagger. It was like as if I was being treated like I was being kidnapped, you know, or, you know, when you think of those courses that you did in the military, I know now, you know, it was to get me into a state of duress. And several, you know, an hour passed. We're in traffic. You know, I'm wanting the toilet. I'm wanting the water. I asked, been refused. And I'm thinking, you know what? I've just seen the news where you're investigating soldiers for not giving an Iraqi food and water and let them go to the toilet. But what are you just doing to me? You know, I was getting more and more angry sat in the back of this wagon because I had no idea what has been said, done. And at this point, I still hadn't connected the call in the October. So I'm now, you know, going over the Tower Bridge and I'm like, they're taking me out of London. I'm like, where are you taking me? They wouldn't tell me, obviously. 3-4 hours pass. I'm now desperate to go to the toilet. I'd asked every 30 minutes to go to the toilet, have some water, was denied each time. Gets to Portsmouth and I'm put into a military custody cell. Met as we came out of the van by this big sergeant major who was really nice, actually. He's one of the custody cellies, and he spoke to me really kindly and calmly. He said, look, whatever's happened, I don't know, but I've tried not to have you here today. So he knew it was wrong. So now I'm frog marched into this custody cell, and there's now 10, 15 mixture of the arrest team, the custody team, and then there's another couple of Burnsides now at the back. And one of them indicates get her in the cell. And at this point, you know, the Webster spirit came out, and I'm like, I looked at all these young lads and at the front of me, I said, any one of you forcibly touch me now, puts me in that cell, I'll have your pensions because what they've done to me today is illegal. And they all stood firm. The sergeant major just got everybody to get out. And he said, whatever's happened, I'm telling you, we'll look after you. He said, I'll try your best not to put you in the cell as much as possible. You will be interviewed soon. Do you want the duty solicitor? And I was like, you know what? Yeah, just get me the duty solicitor. And I was, and that is the key point. They wanted me to get to that point where I would just be compliant. And this Burnside tapped me on the shoulder and he went, it was just process rage. You know, let's get it over and done with, shall we? And that point I was like,
Human.
cancel the duty solicitor. And luckily a friend had, you know, a friend of a friend I knew worked in, was a solicitor in Salisbury, who was ex-military police. And I rang him, or I was allowed my call, obviously, rang him up and he said, stay where you are, stay where you are. Don't say anything, I'm on my way. And then literally connected the call, got me in the interview, said no comment interview, what today you've done is a ruse and it's illegal and you should cease this interview now. Anyway, 14 hours later, I'm released, didn't have any money. I had to borrow money off the solicitor to get me on a train. Stopped at a friend that night because I was done that night. I was ready. I just, the shock of everything. And then the opening black boxes of Kosovo and all the other mishmash. My head's like a washing machine. Couldn't compute anything what was going on. Betrayal, the anger, giving up my whole career, 24 years, thinking that why have they done this to me now? Then I was panicking about my future with Barclays, thinking, oh my God, I lived on my own. The only person who was bringing in the bills, paying the bills was me. What if it interfered with my work? All these things. Tried to ring up various military charities. At that point, no one had 24-hour support back then. And I rang up, the Samaritans again. So I think that's twice in my life. Anyway, so fast forward, it took them 2 years to admit unlawful arrest and detention. It took me 6 months to tell my family and friends that I'd been arrested, because the first question people ask you is, what did you do? And I hadn't done anything. And I hadn't, you know what? And I've said this numerous times. If I'd known anything about that individual, I would have openly said it, but in the right way, contact me in the right way. I didn't have anything of an evidential nature to give. And we all know that there's some things that did go down out in Iraq, but you don't knock the orchard of the ripe, the finest fruit down to get a few bad apples. And that's what the IAT inquiry was doing. It's destroying people's lives. And, so it was a long process. And it wasn't until the story got highlighted in 2016 about, and I think the headline Daily Telegraph ran was "Kidnapped by the State." And they ran the article about what had happened to me after it had been, the military, the MOD had admitted unlawful arrest and detention. And that's when I engaged with Johnny Mercer and used the evidence I'd collated in my case to help him close down the IAT inquiry, of which, that's my first connections with Johnny Mercer, and how he was championing people like me and a few others that had been, treated quite badly. I think I'm the only one, I think there's me and a other that was treated the way I was. And then, at that point then in the 2016, I think that's when the whole boxes imploded. All those little sealed boxes over the years all opened up. And I remember a colleague at Barclays saying to me, "Rachel, I'm seeing a difference in you, and I think you should talk to someone." And Barclays was really great in fact about all the networks, like, people who suffer with ADHD and all these new, OCD and stuff. And he was a project manager, had been working alongside, and he'd opened up about his ADHD and stuff and said that sometimes his behavior might change. So at that point, he then said to me, "Look, come on, I can see something's not right with you." And I went for counselling. I went into counselling for nearly 2 years. And luckily I was in that position at Barclays with their healthcare that I could do that. And that's when a lot of the other stuff was put to bed, like dealing with the, the things in Kosovo, and then the trauma of the arrest. And then also I've had to carry on with the counselling because, unfortunately, as it's now, the term is now coined, moral injury doesn't go away. You think you're dealing with it, but then something will come and bite you, and you're back there feeling betrayed, feeling angry, feeling disappointed. And I think we spoke about it before the podcast. For me, my career might have taken a total different direction in the bank if I'd not been arrested. And I think that's the same for a lot of other soldiers that have probably had to go through what I call now lawfare. Their careers, their relationships, their marriages, their lives have been changed because of undue, prolonged, enduring lawfare investigations that were never proven.
Well, there was a lot that came out about that Phil Shiner as well, that it was, like,
Oh, yeah.
fabricated, fake. I had Brian Wood on, quite
Yeah.
recently on the podcast, and he talks quite openly about how he was completely screwed over by that same guy, and he got
Yeah.
booted out, and he got investigated for all the kind of false stuff and struck off the kind of register for solicitors, didn't he? Because of all the false
Yeah.
accusations. And it's these people, it's like, uh, you do what you do in the military with, and again, I'm speaking for 99.9% of the military. Professional soldiers, yourself, all the people that you work with. Again, there are the odd, and it is the odd bad apple, but you get them everywhere. But as a rule, the British Army are very, very professional in how they treat people, how they
Mm,
treat foreign forces. I think we're probably the best in the world to do it. So when you hear these allegations from me, it gobsmacks me
mm.
that they can get away with this and how they treat individuals, especially when you sacrifice so much,
Yeah.
and then to be treated like that. I cannot get my head around it. And I think it's absolutely disgusting, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was diagnosed, suffered with betrayal trauma, exactly what you've just said. I gave up 24 years of my life, basically, and I'm still extremely proud to this day of that service and to be a veteran. But that point when they did that to me really, really impacted my entire life.
Yeah.
I started leaving, a toxic lifestyle. I couldn't sleep, surviving on 2, 3 hours. It was horrible. And the counseling was that first step. And then I had the association of just stripping it all back and getting healthy. And then starting doing stupid things like marathons and back-to-back marathons and finding a purpose again. Because I think when we leave the service, regardless of the industry you're in, you lose that bit of purpose. And, I found that purpose by helping others, by mentoring, by doing, crazy fundraising. And then more recently, I'd you couldn't write this up really. On the 10th anniversary, I wrote a post on LinkedIn, which went pretty viral, which was, look, this is me, this is my story. 10 years in from my lawfare, still suffering from moral injury. I'd like to bring together a community of other individuals that are maybe still suffering. Doesn't matter whether it's Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Falklands or wherever. Anybody who's been subjected to some form of enduring lawfare investigations, let's try and bring a community together. And it did gain some real positive traction. And then 7 days later, the Daily Telegraph, and the journalist who initially launched my article in the 2016, launched about the connection with Prime Minister and Phil Shiner and the fact that the Prime Minister had done pro bono work for Phil Shiner. And that just brought back lots of anger and anguish across the whole of the veteran community, particularly those who had been dragged out their houses and, investigated. And then that put me back in the spotlight. But this time, I believe it's for a more positive reason because I was able to articulate things much better and to basically coin the phrase lawfare must stop. We should now be at a point from a veteran community to say, this can't go on anymore. And you'll know from your service, when something happens in service, you have a lessons learned activity, don't you?
Yeah.
At no point has there been any lesson learned activity with regards to anyone that has been, investigated like me and like you say, Brian Wood, everybody else. No one realizes the moral injury that we have all gone through and still go through. And forever will we all need touch points with counselling and things like that. It's all well and good, the ministers standing up and I think one of them corrected themselves in the House last week for saying that the Prime Minister hadn't done any pro bono work for Phil Shiner. And then they had to correct themselves and say, actually, he had, and we apologised to the House. Well, how about apologising to veterans who were wrongly investigated and dragged through the mud, their reputations damaged, their lives changed forever? How about our apology for all those who are still suffering from moral injury.
We this is the thing, is because you will always get narrow-minded individuals that will go, "Well, there's no smoke without fire," and stuff like that, but they realise that they just escape. The reason it was done, probably because it was around the time, wasn't it, that all them newspaper articles, it sells papers. People
Yeah.
people, like, they bring it up. Which prime minister was it? Was it the prime minister that's in office now?
Yeah. So
Wow.
our prime minister, before he started on his political journey, was doing pro bono work for Phil Shiner. And
Wow.
some of those cases had his fingerprints all of them, which was probably the reasoning for why I was dragged out my house at 6 o'clock in the morning, and, that's why the journalist from the Daily Telegraph got in touch with me and said, Rach, can we get a comment from you? That we've just found this, disclosed information that Starmer's signature is on paperwork with for pro bono work with Phil Shiner. So he gave his time for free. How nice is that? When I got a small compensation for my unlawful arrest and detention, I went, I don't care about that bit. What I care about is what it did to me. And the solicitor at the time, he's like, Rach, it's just too expensive. Litigation against the MOD. You just can't do it. And no one came forward to do pro bono work for me, because no one, you can't go against the beast of that institution. What I would like is a community of us all who have subjected to lawfare to do a class action against them, similar to what the post office did. Do you know? Why not? Why is that not feasible? Because all of us have had similar experiences to what happened there. With them, the trauma, the betrayal, the accusations, the the issues that we've all had to face because of it. Uh,
Wow.
who
Well,
knows?
what does that tell you about the current government as well, eh? I think everything you've just said there sums up the current government without getting political, but
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
look,
But where do you learn? What do you learn from it? I look back now and go, that grounding that I had, the belief and the values that I was given from my grandparents, truth prevails, Rach. The resilience I got from the steelworks, the resilience of working tirelessly and trying to support, various deployments and working with amazing people across my career, from the Paris to, dare I say, the Royal Marines and everybody else that's had a touch point in my life. Um, I feel, I feel that I'm in a position now to just want to do good and want to help people. And if I can be someone's voice, then that's what I'd like to do. And if I can help anyone who is suffering, you know what? I've been there. It's dark, it's horrible, and it's easy to say you'll get through it, but you will, and you just need someone to talk to.
yeah, and I think, you know, the amazing thing about yourself and a reflection of your character there is, like, you've been to the darkest of depths with what you've been through, and now, instead of just being bitter about it, you want to help other people, and I see that a lot. I do see that a lot in the veterans community, that people get to a point where they're like, you know what, I want to help other people and put back and support them where I had no support when I was
Yeah.
struggling with that. And I think that's a really nice thing to see. And again, I think that's the brotherhood, the sisterhood of our veterans community, that kind of comes together. Um, what have you got coming up? What's in the pipeline now? Because you talked about a book. Can you talk about the book?
Well, sort of ish. I'm very honoured and grateful that Stuart Tootle is helping literally forge a book called Forged in Steel, with the nod to my start of my life at the steelworks, going through, the various peaks and troughs of my career, with the culmination of obviously the arrest and how I then turned that negative into a positive. And yeah, so we'll see how that goes. And then I'm working on a little bit of a special project with somebody that Andy. And I think that might have a real significant impact across not only the veteran community, but the military community as a whole. and hopefully we can both come back on and talk about it.
Yeah, it'd be good to get you both on and have a discussion because again, I've heard about it from you. I've heard about it from Andrew. I'm sworn to secrecy, but I like the idea behind it. I really do. Without giving too much away, I think it'd be a good thing for veterans and serving members of the armed forces as well.
Yeah, and I think it has a crossover to the 999 services as well.
Yeah,
The fire.
absolutely. I
Yeah,
definitely believe, yeah, it could be used for good because again, that the services, the police, the NHS, the fire service, they again, there's a lot of tick box exercises when
yeah,
it comes to mental health. They seem in the public to be doing a lot, but when you know what I know and like what you know about the veterans community and the emergency services, you know that they're just paying lip service to it, sadly,
yeah,
because they don't want to get too deep because they know it's going to cost a lot of money.
yeah.
And that's why they don't get involved. So they go, oh yeah, we're doing all this great stuff. Reality behind closed doors, they're not doing fuck all. They're not really. They're just tick boxing.
Or the money is going to projects that don't actually have a touch point to those in crisis, which
Yeah.
really gets me. They're saying that they invest in millions and millions into various op valor, op courage, op. I've lost count of all the ops, and it's still the small charities that seem, from what I see, picking up those really in crisis, who have hit absolute rock bottom. We shouldn't be getting to them at that point. There should be intervention points before that. And it
Yeah.
just seems that everything is layered bureaucracy, forms, and let's get them, like Veterans Aid is a great example. I know Hugh Milroy really well. Let's get them in that hotel first, then let's do all the paperwork thereafter, instead of, it seems to be, you shouldn't have to be at the 6 month point, knowing that you're going to probably face homelessness if you don't pay your rent in 2-3 months. At that 6 month point, there should be intervention there. You shouldn't be at that, going to a point where they're actually now been removed from their property because they can't pay the rent. Now they're officially homeless. That's what annoys me. Yeah.
Oh,
So
a-
hopefully,
absolutely. It happens all the time. And there's a lot of these charities, I won't mention any of the names, these bigger charities that are sat on fortunes. Why are
yeah.
they sat on that money when there's people out there that need it? And it's not like you can't
Or
go and
share
say,
it.
yeah, or
Share it out to the smaller charities.
exactly. Surely they should be all working together. But unfortunately, when big money becomes involved, people get greedy. And that's the nature of the sad side of human nature again. Um, again, these people that need instant help. I refer a lot of people to the Veterans Volunteer Service. It's a friend of mine called Gary Hart, ex parachute regiment, and various other people that work for that organisation. And I've referred people to them where he's picked up the phone and he's talked to them and he's got them down and involved that night. That's how it needs to be. Not
Yeah.
not 3 months down the line. By that point, they were probably at a point, sadly, where they may have taken their own life.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there are organisations that are out there that are doing good stuff, but unfortunately they go under the radar because they haven't got the funding, and these big organisations are sat on millions of pounds. Anyway, it's political. We know where it is. Hopefully, these sort of things that you were kind of highlighting, that I'm highlighting, that Andrew Dunn's kind of highlighting, everyone's kind of highlighting, all of us together, working together to
Yeah.
highlight these issues, it can only mean a good thing. And it always makes me smile. I'm not a jealous sort of, when I see other veterans podcasts pop up, I don't sit here and go, oh, they're going to steal my thunder. Sadly, some people do feel that way. I don't. I just think that's another voice that's
Yeah.
going to say good stuff and put good topics out there. The more of us that talk about it, the better.
Absolutely. And you're all different. And that's what makes it, unique. Your audience is probably a lot is more paras, because of your background.
Yeah.
So everyone's audience is slightly different. Yeah. And it's great to be having a voice on here, and hopefully, somebody might, hopefully it might get a bit more traction. Who knows, from your normal female people that come on.
Oh, we hope, but this is why we do it. This is why we talk, and we kind of, someone might see it. And I'm a big advocate for networking. The more the people
Yeah,
that are linked
absolutely.
together, the more we can help more and more and get those messages out there. But
And you touched on it, we're stronger together as one voice, and that's similar to the lawfare thing. We're stronger together if all of the lawfare, which currently, there's obviously we haven't talked about it. I know, time and everything, the Northern Ireland piece that's still churning on. As all those, if we once those silos get to a close, a point, let's bring everyone together, because we're all in it as individuals that have suffered lawfare.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, hopefully, again, all of the kind of hard work that you do and all the other kind of people do in raising this awareness and talking about it, hopefully things will change in the future. It's going to take some time, let's be honest. And we're up against it. Everyone's up against it. We know we're up against it, especially when you've just covered that the government is links with people like Phil Shiner. It's just, yeah. So you've got it up against, or you've got it all on to start with, but that doesn't mean we can't stop airing our views and voicing our opinions about it and raising that awareness. But Rachel, been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
And you.
Thank you very much for coming on. I know obviously it's come out of nowhere, to be honest. We were chatting last week and I was like, yeah, I'll get you on. I've got a spot. So I try and do that. It's not always, sometimes they are fastballs. I'm very, very busy, as I'm sure you are as well. So no, it was great that we could get this chatting. And it was great to literally hear your story and, discover the good work that you're kind of doing in helping other veterans. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
No worries. You take care. I will speak soon.